It's the end of the day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Hey, I wanted to bring Wes McArtor back on because, folks, guess what? It's not good news on the print volumes or the amount of service call activity. Yesterday, I did a webinar, and Wes had given me some information on those two numbers. But when I talked to him this morning, he said, hey, Ray, the numbers changed. Wes, great to have you on. I want to start out with the numbers like we always do. So tell me a little bit about our top volume. Before the virus started, I think we were about 12 billion pages a month. And then where are we at today? Because the number you gave me was like 6.7 billion or something, and that was through, I guess, February. So where are we at through March now that it's April 1st?
That was the end of February. The end of March, we ended up at almost just a hair shy of 6 billion. So it came down from 6.7 to 5.9. Service call volume dropped from 432 last month to 413 this month. So we lost quite a bit of service call activity, lost about from 25 billion in parts to 23.
So Wes, here's the question. Here's the question. Anybody with, that's looking at this logically, if the service calls went down, does that mean the techs are fixing it right the first time, and that way they don't have to go back, and that's keeping the calls down?
No, it hasn't really changed first call effectiveness. In fact, in most cases, it's gotten slightly worse. Simply because in order to keep the technicians busy, they're generating call activity that might not otherwise happen. For many dealers that took advantage of the PPP funds, they had the ability to keep those techs on staff. So some of those calls were preventive maintenance, courtesy calls, just kind of keeping them busy. They did a lot of training during that time frame, those kind of things.
Well, it's just amazing to me that we almost lost 700 million pages in 1 month in the database. And you said, I think before we talked, it started to go back up in November, right?
Yeah, it bottomed out in May. Okay. It went on a steady increase, marginally, a very small increase, and it peaked in November, and then it's been going down ever since.
Okay, that's not a good picture. So let me ask you a question. To figure out the amount of techs that are in the database, pre-virus and when I was with you for those 10 months, I think we had about 7,000 technicians that were doing the service calls actively. And so today, if you do that same type of math, I believe it was 100, calls a month per tech divided by the total calls would give you the amount of techs that you need. And if you do the math on the numbers you just gave me, it appears we got like 3,000 less technicians. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So 3,000 less technicians, about 30% less in techs. And we did see some furloughs, obviously, with some of the partners on the platform. Is that true?
Yeah, there were some dealers that had permanent layoffs, permanent furloughs, again, like the ones that took advantage of the PPP funds. They had the technicians on staff. They just weren't doing as many calls per day as they would normally do because the call volume obviously just simply wasn't there to do it. Some techs were repurposed in the business. Some of them used them to make the transition of training and get them more IT oriented versus break fix on the copier side. So every dealer's handling it slightly different, but I think as a general rule, we're going to probably see a 20+% reduction in overall headcount.
Okay. Which, this is kind of being a little bit cynical, I guess, but, I remember when I was with you looking at the World Stats database, I was under the impression we could have got rid of 15 or 20% of the techs back in the heyday. Probably would have increased our service level because we would have had to become more efficient. And so my fear is even with that decline, we're probably kind of still in the same boat. So dealers really need to pay attention to the data, probably now more than ever. What am I missing, Wes?
Well, it's still a function of trying to find those efficiencies. Even with this call volume reduction, you're still looking at close to 40% of the calls being callbacks, another 20% being incomplete for parts, and then all of the other miscellaneous calls that go on top of that. So efficiency hasn't changed dramatically. In fact, we're still what I consider to be grossly inefficient for the most part, but the call volume has dropped, so there's an inevitable decline in headcount that's going to follow that.
Okay, I know you started some other businesses or added value deliverables, I guess, to your core business of the service, department processes, fixing the process of service department. Tell me a little bit about those added value businesses and how is that going for you over the last year with COVID?
Well, it's actually really, COVID has actually launched a lot of it. So one of the best examples I can give you is, a dealer had to furlough a lot of their key administrative people, and upper leadership took over the role. as they took over that role, they realized that there was a lot of things not being done the way they should have been, or things that weren't being done correctly. And so they come to us and go, we don't have the bandwidth to do this. We need to focus on our core business, but we can't justify bringing these people back because our business hasn't come back sufficiently enough. Can we outsource this to you? So they outsource administration, or they outsource HR. In some cases, they've even outsourced the service management role and let us take that over for them. But in the process of that, now that we have CPAs on staff and we have the ability to do what we call a forensic audit, we can go through and literally pull apart the Automate platform, look and see if everything is being done right and the impact of that. So we can make sure all their GL is working properly, their AR is working, that they're getting their accounts receivables and aging process done properly. There's a lot of pieces of that are very complex, and it gets out of control really easy when somebody's getting furloughed and laid off and somebody else has to step into that role, or the things change within the organization and one person trains the next person, and you have that post office effect where the same problem gets handed down from person to person, and this audit kind of uncovers that. And then we can put it back together properly and then set them up and train them for those best practices so that they can do it correctly going forward.
That's pretty awesome. And I know you're doing the virtual service thing, and obviously your data, I think the whole world pretty much knows your data can really help change the service department and make it profitable. But it's interesting with the abilities now that you have with the audits of the Automate platform itself. And are you finding that a lot of the dealers that are participating in that with you are really, kind of banging up their head and saying, wow, And here's a question. Will you be able to shortly, because it's all, once you have data and you really start exploring data with your customers, you're able to really start defining some best practices. Do you see in the future, will you really have clearly defined best practices, kind of like you have with Acuity around service, but more around admin?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what we find is that we don't know what we don't know. So you assume that everything is working because you're getting your financial reports, you're getting your statements, you're doing your billing, the day-to-day operations are working fine. And so until you have this audit, you really don't know what you don't know. And in 100% of the dealers we've done this with, we've uncovered revenue opportunities. We've uncovered sometimes maliciousness. We've uncovered areas where the financials aren't being recorded properly. Therefore, the financial statement they had was readable and usable, but there were pieces of that revenue wasn't being applied properly, or costs weren't being applied properly. And so in order to make good business decisions, you have to trust that the data that you have is 100% correct. And they assume it is, but no one's ever done an audit to prove that it isn't. And so when we do these audits, and literally 100% of the time, we find places that things were not done according to best practices. And so for each section of the business, we find those best practices, whether it's administrative, financial, leasing, billing, collections, service management. Obviously, all of those areas of the business can now be touched in a way that helps ensure that the dealer's getting the most out of that Automate system.
Well, there's one thing I know about you, Wes. You don't tell a dealer what they want to hear. You tell them what they need to hear. So here's a question for me. When you find a problem through the audit of the Automate, maybe it's a cash receivable problem, or it's a customer not being billed right problem, they're pretty eager to fix that, aren't they? Oh my God, we got to fix that. So it still goes back to me. How do we get that impending doom when it comes to the service department, when we got tens of millions of dollars in inventory that's obsolete? When we got way too many technicians, when we got a first call effectiveness of 46%, do you think by your ability to help them with the administrative side and the way that you're doing, we can trickle some of that passion into the service department for these owners?
Well, that's probably the primary reason we started doing these different things, is because obviously tying back inefficiencies directly to the financials and tying back opportunity directly to the financials has a little louder voice than just saying we need to fix it because we need to fix it. So the whole process through all of the tools that we built is to say, here's how much financial impact doing these things will have, and making sure that all of that is being visible to the owner so that they know exactly what's going on in that Automate platform. And when they want to fix it, this audit comes out with a complete document that says, here's what's wrong, here's what needs to be done to fix it. You have two choices. You can either take on that role of fixing it yourself, but if you're not confident that the people who created the problem can fix the problem, we can fix it for you.
Yeah.
And then we'll train those people how not to make those same mistakes again.
Well, Wes, you know, obviously the aggregate of data that you have is so valuable to our channel, you know, to all its actors at the end of the day. And let me ask you a question, because I know I've asked you this before, but I want everybody watching this to make sure they're fully aware that you can do this. But, you know, I keep talking about consolidation. I got my own opinions, even that can direct operations, you know, really function anymore in today's new world. So as we see the industry start to consolidate and dealers maybe are approached to take on new business from either an OEM or whoever, how can your data, why do they need to use your data? They don't need to, and I don't think they need to use it all. They need to use the portion that you can overlay in a map and tell them what's there and what's the real problems that they're getting. Is that true?
That's true. So we have the ability now to do a complete, what I call due diligence. So we can audit the automate, we can audit the financials, we can then take and do an assessment of the territory they're acquiring. So if they're looking at a dealer, we overlay that dealer in their existing territory if it's overlapping to determine how much of that base can we absorb with the existing team that we have in place there, and how many of the technicians need to come over from the acquisition to the new one. We can uncover all of the issues around inventory obsolescence and how are they bucketing their obsolescence, and do they really need all this? Do we need to buy all this inventory or do we not? What percentage of this base has been maintained properly? Has it been taken care of by looking at things like copies between visits and page volumes and part spin trends? Have they been taking care of this equipment? So I'm not acquiring a bunch of stuff that's going to require a huge amount of service activity to get up to our standards. So those are all parts of our due diligence process.
And obviously, you know, the buyer can benefit by not buying a bunch of crap, but the seller can benefit by cleaning up a bunch of crap before they sell it to get a better return on their money. Okay, well, you know, Wes, I want to do a demo just on that one day. I don't want to do it today. Obviously, that's something we got to plan. But I'd love to be able to show the audience how your data can overlap each other. And I know you have confidentiality, so we got to be careful how we do that. But if there's a way you could show, you know, these buyers and sellers out there really how this works, I think it would be valuable as hell, especially now, because over the next 8-9 months, the end of this year, we're going to see some major changes in our space.
Yep, I agree. There's going to be considerably, probably a flurry of activity, both in consolidations and acquisition.
Yep. Well, you know, Wes, it's trying times, but if we just look at the damn data, if we pay attention and we have cost awareness before we build something, we don't have to focus so much on how we're going to build something. What comes first is that, what's my acronym? CABB, cost awareness based billing. Let's know what our true costs are before we start figuring out how we're going to sell something. Is there anything you want to add before I end this?
No, Ray, I think I appreciate the time. Again, you know, the dealers don't know what they don't know. And if 100% of the dealers we've done this forensic audit on have found opportunities, it's a pretty safe bet that a very high percentage of our future customers will have that same opportunity. So I encourage you to reach out to Bud and talk about what that audit looks like and how it can benefit your dealership.
Well, that's awesome, Wes. I appreciate all you do for the industry, because we all know this: status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.
Thanks, Rick.